Good afternoon. Happy Saturday. Jimmy Cosenza here in Chicago. Hope everybody's doing well. It's a big weekend, right? We got the ICE agents are making their rounds, locking up all the illegal migrants and immigrants. You got the major protesting going on downtown. We've got the Puerto Rican parade going on, Cubs game, Randolph Street Fest, and the Old Town Art Fair. Today marks the 39-year anniversary of the brutal murders of Tony and his younger brother, Michael Spilotro. Going back June 14th, 1986. I was a freshman in college. And I remember the day the brothers went missing. That's what we're going to talk about today. I did prior stories on the Spilotro brother murders. And my story today isn't my opinion. It's not something I read in a book or seen online. I'm going to share with you the testimony and some of the evidence that I heard in the family secrets trial when Nick Calabrese, who was present during the Spilotro brothers murders, went into great detail on exactly what happened. I'm going to share that with you. If you like my Chicago mob trial stories, hit the like button, subscribe. I need more subscribers. I want to hit the 4,000 mark. Share with your friends. Don't be afraid to make a donation. And as always, I appreciate all your comments. Now let's get into it. Going back to the early 1970s, I think it was 1971, Tony Spilotro was sent out to Las Vegas to overlook the mob skin of 4 mobbed up hotel casinos, the Stardust, Hacienda, the Fremont, and I think the other one was the Desert Inn. And Joe Lombardo, Jack Cerrone, Iupa, Tony Arcardo told him repeatedly that when he gets out there to keep a low profile, fly low under the government's radar. If Tony Spilotro would have just listened, the Chicago outfit would probably still be running Las Vegas today. But he didn't listen. What does he do? He does the exact opposite direction. One of the first things he does is put together a crew where he has several career burglars, thieves, criminals that he knew from Chicago, joined him out in Nevada. They became the notorious Hole in the Wall gang. These guys were committing burglaries, scores, selling drugs, extorting, gambling, loan sharking with a lot of the hotel casinos, a lot of the local residents, drawing a lot of heat. The Hole in the Wall gang was led by Tony Spilotro. They eventually all got pinched. Frankie Collada, close associate of Tony Spilotro, ended up flipping, cooperating, and brought down the entire crew. Now, why this is going on, Chicago outfit bosses had a meeting, a sit-down at the Czech Lodge, and present were Tony Arcardo himself, Joey Iupa, Carlisi, Rocky and Felice. I think DeFranzo was there, and a few other men. And the first order of business was, since Iupa was stepping down a little bit, Arcardo wanted Sam Carlisi to take over as the overall boss of the Chicago outfit. The second order of business during that meeting was the problem that they had in Las Vegas. The outfit bosses have had enough. And I think the straw that broke the camel's back is when IUPA found out that Tony Spilotro was fucking the Jew's wife. He became livid. He was so upset. He was foaming at the mouth. And I think that's the straw that broke the camel's back. But there was many reasons why they had to take out Tony Spilotro. As I mentioned, number one, these guys were killing people without getting the outfits okay. They were involved in drug use, drug dealing, allegedly with a motorcycle gang. They were doing a lot of robberies in scores, drawing a lot of heat from the Las Vegas Metro Police and also the FBI. Also, the bosses suspected Tony Spilotro of skimming some of the skim. These are just some of the reasons the Spilotro brothers were killed. But I want to know from you guys, what do you guys think? Why was Tony Spilotro and Michael Spilotro killed? Now here's IUPA, boss of the Chicago outfit at the time. He was talked about a little bit during the Sam Carlisi trial and quite a bit at the Family Secrets trial. They would refer to him as the old man. And he led with force. He believed in violence. If you broke the rules, if you got out of line, if you didn't listen, if he thought you were an informant, he'd have you clipped. Now, Nicky Calabrese says that right before he went to prison for the straw man indictment, that was a major blow to the Chicago mob. You had Jack Cerrone, 71 years old, got indicted, went to prison. You had Angelo Petria, 60 years old, was convicted. You had Joey Lombardo, 57 years old. He was convicted. Tony Spilotro was a defendant. You had some of the guys from Kansas City, a couple heavyweights from Milwaukee. And IUPA himself was sent to prison at 77 years old. Nicky Calabrese said that right before Joe Lombardo went to prison, he met with Sam Carlisi and Joe Ferriola. And he said, I want them both knocked down. 1 and 2, referring to the Spilotro brothers. He said, I don't care how you do it, just do it. Now, this is hearsay. Nick Calabrese was not present when Joey Lombardo gave the green light on the Spilotro brothers. He heard this from a dead man, John Feccarata. Somehow, though, the judge allowed that evidence in, and the jurors believed it. Now, love this photo here. Just imagine Tony Arcardo sitting down, having a very serious conversation with his number one man, Joey IUPA. As I mentioned, all the defendants were found guilty. And I'm sure IUPA partially or fully blamed Tony Spilotro for that strawman indictment. Those guys had a beautiful thing. They had all the money coming in from the skim of 4 hotels. They had power, all the women, close with all the Hollywood entertainers, best restaurants, best nightclubs. They had it all. And then they fucked it all up. Now, we got to wonder. We all know why Tony Spilotro was killed. There's many reasons. But what I always wondered, why was Michael killed? Did they just use him as a pawn, as part of the setup to get Tony Spilotro to a spot where they could kill him? Did they think that Michael Spilotro would retaliate if his brother was killed? which I don't think so, because he wasn't a heavyweight. He wasn't a tough guy. He was more of a wannabe, if you will, a Hollywood wannabe actor, a spacone, a big shot, who played the role and threw his brother's name around. Also, though, Michael owned a popular restaurant called Horwitz on the outskirts of the city, and everyone knew they were selling cocaine out of that place, which is a no-no. That alone will get you killed. As I mentioned, for the most part, unlike some of the guys in Philly, Boston, New York, Chicago outfit bosses did not get involved in narcotics, but obviously some of them did. So that could have been a reason why Michael Spilotro was killed, because he was selling cocaine out of a popular restaurant that he wasn't supposed to. Now, the government had an idea who was involved in the Spilotro brothers' murders 39 years ago today, but it was Nicky Calabrese who testified at the family secret trial in 2007. He was one of the men present when the Spilotro brothers were brutally beaten, stomped to death. Now, for the most part, I found Nick Calabrese credible. He was soft-spoken, didn't look like a killer, emotionless, showed no remorse, sat there with white Nike gym shoes on. Sometimes he wore a blue sweatsuit, sometimes he wore a gray sweatsuit. He never once looked over at his brother, Frank Calabrese, who was glaring back at him. Sometimes Frankie the Breeze was laughing out loud. He never once looked at Jimmy Marcello or Joe Lombardo or any of the other defendants. For the most part, I found him credible because he had so much detail. However, there was probably about a handful of things he said where I felt that he told somewhat of a white lie or he embellished a little bit. If I was on that juror, there was definitely a little bit of reasonable doubt. Again, for example, he said that Joe Lombardo was part of the hit team that killed Danny Seifert. He wasn't there, but he heard that from John Feccarata, who was one of the getaway drivers, one of the wheelmen. But that's hearsay. But somehow that evidence is allowed in, and the jurors definitely believed it. But Nicky Calabrese was the only made member of the Chicago outfit ever to testify in court. He testified against his own brother. And his testimony destroyed what was left of the Chicago mob. Nicky Calabrese testified that at first, Plan A, they were going to kill the Spilotro brothers in Nevada. And that's something most of us have never even heard of. That's one thing about these major federal trials. You learn so much. He testified that Jimmy Marcello Nicky Calabrese testified that Jimmy Marcello gave him 2 hand grenades and an Uzi. Nick took a train with an Uzi and 2 hand grenades all the way from downtown Chicago, Union Station, all the way out to Nevada. Now imagine taking a train with an Uzi and 2 hand grenades. He said that the rest of the hit team, men like Frankie Schweiss, John Feccarata, Joey Hansen, and a couple other guys, each member of the hit team got to Nevada with different transportation. For example, one guy drove his car. Nicky took a train. One guy took a bus. One guy flew. They had 2 sleepers. One came from Arizona. One came from California. And once the hit team assembled, Nick testified that they had a hell of a time tailing both Michael and Tony Spilotro. One time when he was tailing Michael Spilotro, he said that he was driving around in a brown minivan, and on the plate it had Solozzi, which is a very popular Chicago mobbed up car dealership. So they had a hell of a time getting a good tail on both brothers. And this was going on for weeks, which led into months. Meanwhile, back home in Chicago, the outfit bosses are getting a little antsy. Guys like Iupa, Carlisi, Joe Ferriola, they were wondering what's taking so long. We're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars. You guys are out there eating, drinking, gambling, and nothing's getting done. So the pressure was on. Fast forward, Frankie Schweiss, right? They called him Hitler. He had the idea that when Tony and Michael Spilotro were coming out of the court building in Nevada, because Tony was always in and out of court. Sometimes his brother would join him. They knew Tony Spilotro had a court date. So Frankie Schweiss suggested when they come out of the court building, he was going to gun them down, spray them both down with an Uzi. Now just imagine killing the Spilotro brothers with an Uzi right there outside a court building in Nevada. All hell would have broke loose. The hit team realized there's no way they could pull it off and get away with it. There was only one road in, one road out. It would draw a lot of media attention, and the outfit bosses would be very upset. So they shelved that plan. But that's a true story. According to Nick Calabrese, they were literally going to kill the Spilotro brothers in Nevada with the Uzi and the 2 hand grenades that Jimmy Marcello provided. Now, the outfit bosses switched to Plan B. Plan B, here's a surveillance photo of Jimmy Marcello, underboss at the time, boss Sam Winks Carlisi, and then Louis the Mooch. This is an actual surveillance photo that I got from the Mob Museum. But this is a surveillance photo they showed in court on the big monitor of these 3 men meeting at that McDonald's in Oak Brook that I've been to many times. As I mentioned before, Oak Brook is a very wealthy suburb of Chicago, and a lot of Chicago outfit bosses, maid members, and associates all live there. Joe the Builder, Ferriola, Joey Iupa, etc. There was another photo that they showed where I think it was Jimmy Marcello, Rocky and Felice, Ferriola, all meeting prior to the Spilotro's murder. But this is an actual surveillance. This was the planning of the Spilotro brothers, Plan B. Now, why this was going on, Nicky Calabrese testified that his brother Frank Calabrese, who he worked for, was down in Florida. And Frankie was either down there on vacation or I think he had some health issues. But regardless, Nick Calabrese testified that he was giving his brother daily updates, play-by-play on what was going on with the planning and the execution of the Spilotro brothers. And at first, Frank Calabrese was a little wary. He's wondering how come he wasn't invited to be part of the hit team. Also, later on in Nick's testimony, Frank Calabrese said that he wanted to personally be there for the beatdown. Now, that kind of contradicts what Nick Calabrese and Junior Calabrese testified to understand, because they said that the Calabrese family was very close with the Spilotro family. But Frank Calabrese had absolutely nothing to do with the brutal beatdown of the Spilotro brothers. I will never, ever forget seeing this man in court take the stand and testify in his own defense. Imagine being 20 feet away from a real made member of the Chicago mob, a psychopath, a real killer. A man's whose MO was to strangle him with a rope, sometimes his bare hands, and then slit their throat from ear to ear. Imagine watching Frank Calabrese in court as his son and brother destroyed him and testified against him. Now, this particular day, I was not in court. I missed it, sadly. Michael Spilotro's wife and daughter testified. And I would have loved to see their testimony because it was very interesting. But more importantly, I wanted to see if I recognized Michael Spilacio's wife or his daughter from some of the bars and restaurants that I hang out at. But anyways, Michael Spilacio's wife testified that back in June 14th, 1986, he was acting very odd that day, her husband. And at one point, he took off all his jewelry, including his wedding ring, took some cash out of his pocket, put it in a plastic baggie, gave it to his wife and said, if I'm not back by a certain time, we're in trouble. She testified to that. She also testified that when he never made it home that later that night, she began to worry. I think she waited 24 or 48 hours and she filed a missing persons report. His daughter, Michael Spilacio's daughter, testified that during that day, June 14, 1986, he kept telling her throughout the day how much he loved her. She also testified that she received a call from a man that she recognized his voice, who asked to speak with her father, Michael. That call was made from a payphone at a gas station not too far from Jimmy Marcello's home. His lawyer, Tom Breen, one of the best defense attorneys in the country, questioned her and said, how could you remember Jimmy Marcello's voice on a payphone 30 years ago? But that was her testimony, that she recognized Jimmy Marcello's voice. And according to Nick Calabrese, it was Jimmy Marcello who set up the Spilaccio brothers. Here's the Spilaccio brother home that the brothers left on that day, never to return. According to Nick Calabrese, if you believe his testimony, he claims him, John Feccarata, this guy here, Nick Calabrese, John Feccarata, and Jimmy LaPetria all waited outside in the parking lot at a Venture store. Who remembers Venture stores? This was like a Kmart or a Walmart. He says that Jimmy Marcello picked up the three men in a real fancy minivan. Jimmy Marcello dropped them off at the house in Bensenville. And this house was owned, I think, by either Louis the Mooch, one of his relatives, or somebody else. I'm forgetting their name. Please enter into the comments whose house this was. But this was definitely an Outfit Guys Associates home. So Nicky Calabrese testified that he got to the house early. When he got there, first person he greeted was Sam Carlisi. He said he knew most of the men there, but there was a couple men there that either he didn't know or he didn't recall. He didn't remember. Carlisi greeted him and was making some smart-ass comments on Nick's tan, all the money that they spent out in Nevada, making Nick a little uncomfortable. Nick Calabrese testified that while he was making small talk with Carlisi and some of the guys, that John Feccarata beelined it right to the bathroom. Nicky Calabrese testified on the stand that he noticed Feccarata was in there a long time. When he finally came out, Nick said Feccarata was white as a ghost. White as a ghost, meaning Feccarata thought they were going to kill him because he was kind of on thin ice. Now, Nick goes on to say that shortly after, he heard someone say they're here, meaning the brothers arrived. Nick Calabrese said that they all had gloves on. He said that he's tense. He's nervous. He knows what's about to go down. Nick Calabrese goes on to say that Michael Spilotro was the first to enter the house. As Michael walked down the stairs, Nick greeted him with a handshake and a smile because he was friends with him. He then grabbed his ankles and tackled him while Louis the Mooch, with a rope, strangled Michael from behind. Nick said Michael didn't put up much of a fight at all. He died quickly. While he's being strangled from behind by Louis the Mooch, a small 22 caliber gun fell out of Michael's pants. Nick went on to say that John DeFranzo picked up that gun, unloaded it, and then wiped a smudge of blood off the wall. Now, why this is going on, Nick went on to say that he heard Tony Spilotro, who just witnessed his brother get murdered. He knows the jig is up. He asked to say a prayer. That prayer was denied. And then Tony Spilotro was brutally beaten, stomped. Nick said he couldn't see from his view who was beating on him, but he certainly heard it. Now, some people think Nick Calabrese is full of shit, that there's no way in hell the men that were there that day participated in the brutal beatdown. They think Nick Calabrese put these men there to make his story stronger. Me personally, I believe, Nick, that all these men were there. And I'm going to give you two reasons. Number one, like I said, he had a lot of detail. I think Tony Spilotro pissed off the bosses so much that they wanted to personally be there to get their licks in. That's just my opinion. What do you think? Also, I know from previous mob murders, like, say, William Action Jackson, you had Angelo Lapetria, Jack Cerrone, Turk Torello, I think Mad Sam, heavyweights all participated together to brutally torture and kill Action Jackson. Also, two of the murders at the Family Secret Trial that Nick went into great detail on was what they called strangers in the night. One was a burglar, one was a burglar's friend. As these gentlemen were brutally jumped, beaten, and strangled by the outfit crew, the song Strangers in the Night was playing on the jukebox. So imagine getting strangled and killed while Strangers in the Night is playing. So Calabrese brothers gave that murder that nickname, Strangers in the Night. But I bring up that because that particular murder, you had Angelo Lapetria there, you had Joe Ferriola, you had Sam Carlisi, Calabrese, and a few other guys. So that's another murder where the heavyweights took part in. Again, the Chicago outfit was different. They weren't like New York, Philly, where they have chumbalones or associates do a lot of their work, which they do. At times, guys like Ferriola, DeFranzo, Wings, Marcello, these guys had no problem getting their hands dirty. Now, Nicky Calabrese also went on to say that he thought out of the corner of his eye, he saw Rocky and Felice. Now, keep in mind, it was 30 years ago. For the most part, he had a pretty good memory, but there was a few guys there that he didn't remember, who he didn't know. Tom Breen, Jimmy Marcello's attorney, one of the best attorneys in Chicago, he jumped on that. During the cross, he said that Rocky Infelice was under surveillance by the FBI in a totally different location. There's no way Rocky could be at two places at the same time. So right there, to me, that's reasonable doubt. Nick Calabrese is saying he thought he saw Rocky Infelice there, but yet the FBI had him on surveillance somewhere else. That's reasonable doubt, or that's a lie. However, me personally, I think Rocky was there. Why? To personally get his hands in licks in. That's how pissed off they were at Tony Spilotro. Maybe the government or the defense attorney got it wrong. Maybe they mixed the dates up, or maybe Rocky somehow gave the agents a slip, made it over to the house in Bensenville, and took part in the brutal beatdown. So I'm not sure if Rocky was there, and Nick Calabrese says he thought he was there, but he wasn't quite sure. What do you guys think? Now, there are some people, like Old Red, some of these other YouTubers, that say they heard that they all sat around and drank scotch before they were brutally beaten. And it's possible because when they showed the autopsy photo, right? Hang on, let me find it. When they showed this autopsy photo of Tony Spilotro, you could hear the in the courtroom. There was like a gasp. Brutally beaten from his chest to his head. Totally purple, black, and blue. You couldn't even recognize him. But during the autopsy photo, neither Tony or Michael had any, they had no drugs in their system, but there was alcohol. So maybe they did have a few drinks to loosen these guys up. I mean, it makes sense. But I still question that because according to Nick Calabrese's testimony, he never once said anything about anybody having any drinks. He also knew who Frankie Schweiss was, and he didn't put Frankie Schweiss in the basement there. So Frankie Calabrese, Frankie Schweiss were not part of the Spilotro brothers' murder. I just want to make that clear. Now, after the brothers were brutally beaten and stomped, it was a different crew that took part in burying the brothers. These bodies were supposed to never be found. And Tony and Michael both, they had a lot of friends. A lot of the outfit guys and associates actually liked these guys. And they could easily put a bullet and kill Tony or Michael. But for some reason, they brutally beat and stomped them with their fists and their feet. That's a terrible, horrible way to die. And I think the reason they chose that method, that's personal. That's how upset they were with how badly Tony Spilotro fucked things up in Vegas. What do you guys think? Now, going back to the day they disappeared, I remember about 2 weeks or week and a half, my friend and I went to the junkyard. I forget where it is. If you guys know, please enter it into the comments, somewhere on the outskirts of the city. But a lot of people thought that the 2 dead bodies were somewhere in this mobbed up junkyard. Fast forward, a farmer had some issues. I think he noticed some dead animal or the corn wasn't growing somewhere. He called the authorities, or court authorities came, and they found the brutal battered bodies of the brothers. They were stripped down to their underwear. One of them had on some fancy see-through underwear. That was probably Michael Spilotro. They were throwing one body on top of the other, but these bodies weren't supposed to never be found. Now, a different hit team was responsible for the burial. You had men like Dominic Palumbo, Chicago Heights crew El Taco, John Fecarata, and 2 other guys. I'm forgetting their name. So here's these guys from Chicago. They're out there in Ingles, Indiana, not too far from Joey Upa's home. It's pitch black. They've got walkie-talkies, transmitters. They're about to start burying, digging a hole. They heard a car, somehow heard a noise, got spooked. They lost touch of one another. They dug a very shallow grave and got the hell out of there. Fast forward, in a different trial, El Taco's wife testified against him. She said that on the day the Spilotro brothers disappeared, or right around that time, her husband called her, yelling, swearing like a maniac to pick her up. This is before GPS. I don't know how the woman found him. She said when she finally found him, he was like a maniac, talking about the men that he was with, talking about what he just did. He was in work clothes. He was full of dirt, and he was out of breath. Her testimony helped convict El Taco. So it was El Taco, John Fecarata, and this man here that participated in the burial of the Spilotro brothers. Here's a car, a work car that they torched. This was found not too far from the burial site. Again, the autopsy photo, blunt trauma from the torso up, black, blue, and purple. Now here's Pat Spilotro. He was obsessed with his brother's murders. He was an informant. Nobody knew about it. He was very close friends with a lot of the mob guys. I seen him testify in court. He appeared a little arrogant, a little cocky, and kind of like he had an axe to grind. He would visit mob guys and associates in federal prisons all over the country. Marion, Terre Haute, Milan, Oxford. And he asked all of them, who killed my brothers and why? Some of them didn't know. The ones that knew ghosted them. So he started cooperating with the government, giving the government an A to Z on who's who, past, present, current activities. And it was funny in court because he looked just like Tony Spilotro, but a lot bigger. Some people tell you he was the toughest Spilotro, but he was a pretty successful dentist where a lot of the mob guys went. And why Joey Lombardo was on the lam, he asked Joey, who killed my brothers and why? Joey said to him, Doc, if I was not in prison, this would have never have happened. And I hate to disagree with a guy like Lumpy, but God himself could not have saved the Spilotros. Joey, nobody. That's how bad they fucked up. I do believe, though, if Joe Lombardo was not in prison, Tony Spilotro would not have gotten out of hand. A couple weeks later, he met with Joey again. When Joey had a relapse with his toothache, he asked Joe Lombardo again, who killed my brothers and why? This time, Joey said, Doc, when you're given an order, you got to follow that order, you go too. He didn't like that response from Joey. He called the feds and ratted out Joey Lombardo. They arrested him and his good friend Dominic Calarco when Joe Lombardo was on the lam in Elmwood Park. You guys could check out that story I did prior. Now here's Tony Spilotro. Great photo of Tony Spilotro and Michael Spilotro coming out of court. I think this is at the Dirksen Federal Building. He had Oscar Goodman. In my opinion, he's the GOAT, the best defense attorney in the history of criminal defense attorneys. He saved Tony Spilotro's ass several times. However, I think Tony Spilotro would have been better off going to the can. He probably would have did 10, 20, 30 years, came home in his 80s, and probably would have been one of the bosses of the Chicago outfit. Sadly, though, as I mentioned, 39 years ago today, June 14th, 1986, this is the final resting place of Tony and Michael Spilotro. God bless Michael, Tony Spilotro, and their families. God bless all the victims of Tony Spilotro. If you guys like my story, hit the like button, subscribe, share with your friends. Probably next week, I'm going to drop a show, my rat of the month, my June rat of the month. Government informant, Chicago outfit, go to bookmaking. You got Lefty Rosenthal. We're going to talk about him. Everybody have a safe, wonderful weekend. Hit the like button, subscribe, share with your friends. Don't be afraid to donate. And for you haters out there, put down the crack pipe, grab the old lady, go to the VFW, and take her to bingo. Ciao.